becomes more of a working session. And if you recall, again, probably the historical memory works best for those who've been part of this group for a while. Even though we've had a couple-year break in the middle, we treat the document as an evolving document as when we work in the regulations. We treat changes as ideas. They go through a very long vetting process internally. We work closely with our AAGs to make sure the final changes are appropriate. We work with other state agencies, and then, of course, once they do get published, they go through the public comment period and then ultimately end up in front of the Maryland Healthcare Commission commissioners for consideration on where to go. And then they follow the state process in which they go to AELR for review, and then ultimately they get published and become final if that's how it ends up. So we're at the beginning of a long journey. We're not expecting to set a goal on when we plan to get through all 12 sections. We thought we'd leave this open to the progress of the work and to the magnitude of information that needs to be covered. So with that, if again, for those of you who recall, we typically do introductions, but I don't know that that's going to work. What we had thought we would do is everyone has seen the individuals invited, and Alana will talk about what we'll do is we'll share with you all back individuals who actually appeared. So we'll have a roster of invited and those who attended. So let me pause for a moment. It's always my pleasure to turn to our executive director to make a couple opening remarks before we get started. And then Alana's giving me the evil eye saying I jumped ahead on the agenda, but I see Ben here, so I thought I would invite him to say a few words to begin with.
Thank you, David. I want to welcome everyone back to the work group after about a 2-year hiatus. We have some important work to do. I also think the importance of information exchange has been certainly amplified over the last 18 months, and the importance of the roles that HIEs can play in the state is obvious to virtually everyone, if not back 2 years ago, certainly now. So we have some opportunities as well as some challenges, and I think it's a great timing for us to delve into these issues. Hopefully we can make sure we have complete input from stakeholders, but move ahead in a relatively timely fashion to get changes put in place before not too long. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Ben, and we appreciate you making time to join us and giving us your feedback along the way. So with that, let me turn it over to Alana, who's going to talk logistics for a moment or two.
Yeah, thank you, David. And I'm still admitting a few folks, but just a quick note that we are recording the meeting. If you do have any difficulty joining the virtual meeting, you can dial in over the phone using the information provided in the calendar item or on the MHCC website. If you do need assistance, please feel free to contact Melanie. I've added her contact information in the chat box. And we do ask that all attendees please mute their lines when not in use. And we may go ahead and mute some lines if we do get some background noise, but feel free to unmute yourself when you're speaking. If you would like to speak, there are a couple of ways to notify us since there are so many on the call. The first is to use the raise the hand function in Google Meet, which appears as a little button at the bottom center of your screen. You may also choose to hold up a piece of paper or a Post-it, something to flag our attention. And for those joining us over the phone, we will pause intermittently just to ask if anyone on the phone has comments or questions. And we do just ask that you announce yourself when speaking. In the event that the meeting is hacked, please hang up immediately. We will work as quickly as possible to send a new meeting link to the group so that we can rejoin on a different link. And David has already mentioned the meeting attendees, so I will go ahead and hand it back to him for the next item on the agenda.
Okay, so I think we're going to just keep moving forward on the agenda. I think everyone understands and can give us a little patience if things get bumpy and clunky along the way. There's 47 of us on this call, and treating a group of 47 as a work group of sorts, it can be a bit of a challenge, but we will work through it and make this as seamlessly as possible. We value your input, we value your participation, and we're looking forward to hearing some of that today. So Alana, why don't we keep moving through the agenda?
Okay, so next up is a quick review of the health information technology legislation from the 2021 session. In 2021, there were a number of pieces of legislation that were passed. The first is now Chapter 798. It was House Bill 1375 of the 2021 Laws of Maryland, Health Information Exchanges and Electronic Health Information Sharing and Disclosure. And this bill requires MHCC to adopt regulations that require the state-designated health information exchange to develop and maintain a consent management application to promote the protection of electronic health information of a person who has opted out. It also requires MHCC to make a recommendation to the Maryland General Assembly on an updated definition of HIE in law. The next item is Chapter 790. It was House Bill 1022 and Chapter 791, Senate Bill 748 of the 2021 Laws of Maryland, Public Health, State Designated Exchange, and Clinical Health Information. And this requires nursing homes to electronically submit clinical information to the state designated HIE on request of MDH. It also requires an electronic health network to provide specified electronic healthcare transactions to the state designated HIE and prohibits an EHN from charging a fee to a healthcare provider, payer, or the state designated HIE. And data submitted to the state designated HIE by a nursing home and EHNs can be used for public health and clinical purposes, including a state health improvement program, mitigation of a public health emergency, and improvement of patient safety. So I recognize that's a quick overview. David, did you have anything to add to those?
Sure. So let me just say a word or two, and then perhaps Ben might have a comment here. The electronic health network requirement that Alana mentioned, Chapter 798 or House Bill 1375, the electronic health network work group convened once, and we're very pleased to have participants from the clearinghouses, if you will, that have joined this discussion. I believe Mr. Dennison is on the group who have joined us here today from Change Healthcare. We're pleased to have him participate on the work group and happy that he could make the meeting today. At issue is we have to come up with recommendations on how to implement transaction standards. The legislature and the governor, in lieu of the pandemic, as well as looking at population health implementation of measures and protections, had decided that one way to get information to inform population health-based initiatives is to look at administrative transactions. So we're working closely with the electronic health networks to see how we can implement the transactions. The real interesting notable point that some have brought up is that back in 2019, the commission studied, which was Senate Bill 896, Health Record and Payment Integration Program Advisory Committee, essentially made recommendations that at the time it didn't make sense to proceed with a law that requires clearinghouses to make available to the state designated HIE administrative transactions. Now, the logic back then made sense. there were challenges around costs, there were challenges around ownership, there were challenges around making the transaction standards integratable with the standards that an HIE uses. But the pandemic changed things. So those who would consider the recommendations of 896 from the past as valid for the future, the unfortunate, I guess, for some is that we've moved beyond that, and now we know we have a use case. Even though it's a broad category, it's still a focus area, which is population health. So we're very much looking forward to the clearinghouses working with us to find a way to gradually implement the requirement in a way that is not sort of a shock and awe event, and that it's logical and it supports the work that we're trying to do related to population health in the state. So we appreciate the EHM's, or said differently, the clearinghouses help here. The second area on the consent management utility that Alana mentioned, which was House Bill 1022, it's really an interesting opportunity for us to have consumer input or consumer control into opting in or opting out of, or even opting back into, for HIEs in the state. We have about 11 registered and 1 state designated HIE. And what we're finding is that more and more consumers are coming forward and wanting control of their electronic health information. And to do this and make it easy for consumers, there needs to be a centralized way to do that. We are working closely with Chris to explore opportunities around the consent management utility. They have some good ideas. We've had some great discussions. It's probably not going to be something that gets implemented in the next couple of months. We think there's developing the technology, there's vetting the technology and getting input, and then there's policies that ultimately become regulations that would need to come. We'd like to bring them back to this group to get feedback. So that's really where the consent management utility comes into play. We're just starting down this pathway, but we think it has relevance to the work that you all are doing and great value to consumers as one central place to opt in or out of an HIE is a very logical approach. So let me pause there and see if Ben has some additional comment on these two bills.
David, I think we should forge ahead. Maybe we want to pause here and see if anyone has any initial comments or questions rather than me commenting further at this point.
Understood. Any thoughts, reactions from the group? Okay, I don't see any. Hearing none, we will continue traveling on. So, Alana.
Okay, thank you. So next up, I'll present our brief presentation that overviews the draft policy changes that we'll present to you in a few moments. So I'll provide a little bit of background regarding the draft changes. In December of 2019, MHCC released a request for proposals to identify a contractor that would make suggested changes to modernize the HIE privacy and security regulations that were adopted in 2014. The regulations expand on privacy and security protections established by HIPAA and amended by the Health Information Technology for Economic and Clinical Health Act, or HITECH. And then in July of 2020, Post and Shell was chosen for that work to review the regulations in the context of evolving national policies. So key enhancements seek to align the regulations with the ONC Health Information Technology on that was issued on May 2020 to implement certain provisions of the 21st Century Cures Act, and that covers or focuses on advancing interoperability, supporting the access, exchange, and use of electronic health information, and then also making patients' health information more accessible. So the first area of focus is interoperability, which allows HIEs to share and access health information across disparate systems and increase transparency for consumers. So key additions that were made specifically are a reference to the 21st Century Cures Act, a definition of interoperability, and a definition of the 21st Century Cures Act. And as I go through these slides, I should note that each of these sections referenced here will be discussed in more detail as we go into that portion of our meeting today. So this is kind of just a high-level overview to give you an idea of what we'll be digging into. The second area of focus is information blocking. This, of course, is a practice that, or an act that will interfere with, prevent, or materially discourage access, exchange, or use of electronic health information. And changes regarding information blocking are the addition of a definition and then also incorporating an information blocking prohibition and penalties for engaging in information blocking. Application program interfaces, or APIs, which enable different computers to communicate with each other. Changes regarding APIs include the definition of API, reference to the right to use a secure third-party smartphone application, integration of APIs as a form of communication with consumers, and then a requirement to implement standardized APIs. There are also some changes regarding consumer access. Those include removing barriers and ease of access. So specifically related to accommodations for translation services and services for hearing and visual impairments. Clarification that any notice or other document required to be in writing will be provided by electronic means. Recognition of a reading comprehension level, and then also accessibility of notification to a healthcare consumer in the event of a breach or non-HIPAA violation. Regarding information maintenance and transparency, there was a provision for immediate updates in PHI and access changes to span across multiple platforms. System administrator data monitoring to ensure information is available immediately to consumers. Consumer access via expanded platforms to retrieve PHI. Also educational materials for sensitive health information, and disclosure of PHI for commercial purposes. And I think finally, privacy and security. So this gets again at the expansion of safeguards beyond HIPAA and high-tech baselines, and in consideration of existing technology capability. So these address things such as cybersecurity, updated reference to NIST requirements, audits and annual audit requirements, third-party system protocols, and then also auditing policies and procedures. So that sums up the overview, and I will hand it back to David to move forward with the review of the regulations.
Okay, thanks, Alana. So we're going to switch up documents here, and I'm going to tell you a little bit about what you're looking at and how we're going to go through it. So hopefully it's sized appropriate and everyone can see it. If you all are having trouble with it, let us know and we'll size it a bit more. The regulations has an existing 12 sections. We don't imagine making progress through all 12 of them today, or we would be here much beyond our scheduled departure time. But what we're going to do is use a very similar approach to how we've done it in the past. We're going to start at section 01, if you will. And what you're going to see are strike-throughs and inserts. And we can pause right here for a moment. And what we want to do is give everyone a moment or two to look at the strike-throughs and inserts. We're going to talk a little bit about them, but we're really going to focus in on areas that are highlighted, and you'll see them when you get to it because they'll be highlighted in yellow, and we'll spend time talking about. We think these are more what we would call real policy discussions, but at the same time, we don't want to discount the impact of what a simple strike through and a word change can mean, because as we've seen over the years, the value of words can be pretty steep one way or the other. What Alana will do is, if there are questions, comments, concerns, she will add insert boxes along the way and include the comments in the margin of the document. We may not necessarily solve for it today, but we'll come back to it. So we're looking for your ideas, we're looking for your thoughts, we're looking for concerns, or anything that you feel that's notable. This is where we want to start. We'll have much more in-depth conversation as we get deeper into the document, or we step onto the yellow shaded boxes, which are the areas that Alana included in the slide presentation. So let's start and see how this works. We may need to tweak it or adjust it as we go. But starting with section 01, the very first change is simply in the title. Doesn't seem like a real challenge. It seems pretty straightforward. And then we look a little deeper into it on that first paragraph, letter A, and it says, by adopting specific requirements intended. And then we will scroll down a little bit. Alana, go ahead. Oh, so everyone can see. Now, this is where if you all could take a few moments to just read 4 and 5 and let us know if you have any concerns or thoughts. And Robin Elliott has the question, will there be an opportunity? Oh, I think I lost the comment.
It says, will there be an opportunity to go back to sections if we have comments after we've had a chance to review and reflect more on today's discussion?
Absolutely. We don't believe that this is a one and done. In fact, some of the homework we're going to ask you all to do is to go back through what we've covered today and see if there's anything that comes to mind, either after you've had a chance to think about it or it's something that pops to mind. So yes, Robin, to answer your question. Okay. I don't see any other questions, comments at this point. So let's go down a little bit further.
David?
And as questions pop up, Alana, are you able to see them?
So Sally Ann has her hand raised, as does Mike Dennison.
Very good. So Sally, let's start with you, and then we'll come back to Mike. And you may be on mute.
David, going back up to the initial red line.
Sure.
Is there some place in this document which specifies what information can be altered by the HIE? Is there an agreement between sort of an omnibus agreement of what information can be modified by the HIE at the request of the provider?
So there's information down further that talks about making changes, what the HIEs can do, and the process for doing that. So
Okay.
We will be able to talk about that further down.
Okay, thank you.
You bet. Mike, question?
Yeah, on the new section number 4 there, it says, except as specifically authorized by the healthcare provider of the information. I think that you may want to consider that may or may not be the designated record set holder. I guess, and I guess, or the system of record. So maybe you want to use language like that is more aligned with federal language as to who is authorized and who is the designated record set holder or system of record.
Okay, so we'll add that as a comment. So Thank you, Mike. We will enter that in. Does anyone else have any thoughts related to what Mike proposed here?
Yeah, this is Walter. Can you hear me?
Sure, Dr. Suarez. Good afternoon.
Thank you. Good afternoon. Thank you. Yeah, I was going to make a similar comment. It feels like the wording there is missing something. Healthcare provider that is the custodial of the information or that has generated the information. And then it raises all sorts of other questions because at the end of the day, a piece of information that is on a record might come from different sources. I might have gone through different iterations from different providers. So I think that is a very important point to consider. And then the other question I have is the mechanism by which this authorization will be issued by the healthcare provider or by the healthcare consumer.
Understood. So let's add that in, Alana, as well. Thank you, Dr. Suarez. And Pamela Rain, please.
Yes, hi. I'm not sure I'm comfortable with the idea that HIE should modify the information ever. The idea would be that it would be modified in the source location and potentially pushed to the HIE. But I'm not sure the HIE should be modifying it because then you get disconnects as to what the source information record says versus what the HIE is maintaining.
Yeah, I think that's a very good point. So I think what you're suggesting is that the HIE can be responsible for directional activities. For example, saying this is where the source file is and referring consumer or caregiver back to the source file.
Exactly. Yep.
Okay. So
this is Mike Dennis, and I agree with that. That's kind of what I was getting at, is that basically the designated record set or the system of record should always be the source of truth, and only modifications at that source should be allowed.
Yeah, and Mike, that's a very good point, and it's an interesting one because how far back can you track the record is a question I think we've heard over time. But I think what Pamela and Dr. Suarez was noting is that the HIE ought to be able to go back as far as it can, but that doesn't always mean it would be the actual starting point for the record, because it gets handed off. But I think you make a very good point. And let's see, I think we have Sally Ann.
Yeah, David, I agree with those comments. That's basically where I was going, is, what agreements have been made between the HIE that they could, and healthcare providers since I last was involved with this, because our last discussion was the electronic health record, or whatever the source is the source of information. The health record is the source of information. So I'm satisfied now if we move that language.
Yeah. Very good.
Yeah.
Dan, you have a comment?
Yeah, thanks, David. Just real quickly, on number 5, assisting public health agencies, et cetera, and reaching public health goals. I mean, those are goals as set by who exactly? I'm looking at it, I'm thinking you have including improving healthcare delivery, healthcare outcomes. I mean, maybe also want to put something in there related to equity, or eliminating health disparities, things like that. I mean, who selects what those public health goals? I mean, obviously that's not an exhaustive list, but who selects the ones that are included in the specific regulations?
Yeah, I think that's a very good point. Does anyone else have any thoughts about that? Yeah, Kim Camerata. Good afternoon.
Hello. Yeah, and my thoughts were more along the lines of sort of, and again, I can't, it's hard to say this in a vacuum, right? We're looking at one provision, so without seeing this in its entirety. There's also a concern about if we're dealing with state governmental actors in the public health arena, that's one thing. But if we're talking about other entities that may claim a public health interest when really they're just trying to get data for reasons other than true public health, that's a concern. So this opens up the door to sort of beyond your traditional public health entities to private healthcare stakeholders that may claim a public health interest that may not be legitimate. So again, without seeing it in its totality, that raises a concern for me.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. It's almost like, I think what Kim, I hear you saying is a bit on the research perspective. If there's a request to do research, is it really research based, or is it to help with marketing and promotion? I think that's what I hear you calling out. So we'll add that. And perhaps Mike wants to expand on that. Mike, your thoughts?
No, I was actually going to go back to 4 in the second half of that, where it says modified with authorization by the healthcare consumer who is the subject of the information. I think that opens up a bit of a question as to how the healthcare consumer would know if their record is correct or not. So I think we probably have to put some guardrails around that. If the consumer is reporting that this information is not associated with me, I think that's appropriate. But if they are authorizing a modification of the record that is not aligned with the designated record set system of record, that might be of concern.
Yeah, I think you bring to light even a bigger point isn't it really the obligation between the consumer and the provider to work out any changes, and it's really up to the provider to publish or make that available, assuming they accept the revision to the record available to the HIE.
Exactly, and then that makes the system of record would push that change to the HIE then.
Yeah, I think we have to try to make that a bit clearer here. Kim, are we is this the appropriate glide path to be on with this?
Same, yeah, and this is a lack of knowledge on my part. In my unit, we definitely are getting more and more complaints from patients who have someone else's record in their EHR, and trying to address that with hospitals is often difficult. And so I'm curious to know sort of how that works on the back end. So if it's been pushed to the HIE and then later learn that record is not that person's record at all, how quick, if a change is made, if the correction is made, what is the protocol for pushing the fix?
Yeah.
And is it a mandated protocol?
So why don't we, let's invite Craig Bem, who's the executive director of CRISP for Maryland, to make a comment to Kim's question.
Sure, happy to. Hi, everybody. So I think there's probably two similar but different issues. One issue would be if two different people were merged by the HIE because they had similar demographics. When we hear about that because a provider calls or potentially a patient calls, we review the record in the MPI, and if there's a clear reason to split the records, we will split the records. And I don't think we have formal kind of service level agreements on the timing, but we prioritize those cases. Those are really important to address immediately. If a healthcare entity updates a record, those records are for the most part pushed to us in real time. And so, for example, if a hospital changed a record, then it would flow to CRISP and it would replace the record in CRISP. So those are both relatively immediate changes when they're known.
Kim, any reaction there?
The real-time push is helpful. Of course, we were also just talking about CRISP when you teed off with there are 11 other HIEs.
That's true.
that may not act the same way. So.
Yeah, and Dr. Burrows, are you able to make a comment here? I think to address Kim's point about a different perspective from an HIE.
Good afternoon, everyone. We actually, with the health exchange that we're using within our network, with eClinicalWorks, we follow the same process that Craig outlined. Once we're notified that records were linked in error, do the troubleshooting, and we have to work with the vendor to go in and separate those records. So nothing new to add, unfortunately.
Yeah, that's very important. Thank you, Dr. Burrows. And perhaps Rob Horst, who is representing Audacious Inquiry as an HIE, could expand a little bit or elaborate if there's a uniquenesses that hasn't been shared thus far.
Sure. Yeah. Hi, everybody. Nice to see you all. We actually operate the exact same way Craig did as well. Our system in Maryland actually leverages the exact same master patient index that CRISP uses. So really whatever policy they're following is the same one we're going to be following. So hope that helps.
Yeah, thank you. Although to Kim's point, that's not getting at every HIE in the state, but we're seeing a fairly consistent pattern so far. But I think we need to add some clarification in the draft proposed regulations here, and I think that's what we'll take away as a homework assignment. I would like to move on. If there aren't any other questions to 4 and 5, let's go on.
I just had a quick question, David.
Sure.
And it's probably one that I should have remembered or may have been answered. From a quantitative and also qualitative standpoint, what data do we have to suggest that we're catching this on a regular basis, the missed records, where consumers even aware of the fact that it's happened? Or is it just because Chris is doing it or the other HIEs are doing it on their own?
So that's an interesting question, Dr. Connor. You're essentially asking, is an HIE validating the data? I think
Yes.
The answer is they're not in. I'm not aware of any HIE anywhere that actually does data validation. They're really more in the business to move the information between the providers. And it typically, where there's a challenge with the information, it's brought back to the HIE or back to the provider. But HIEs, keep me honest here, they're not actually what I would call monitoring the accuracy of the information and flow, or at rest for that matter.
And I guess I'm thinking that if in fact that was a process that was in place some kind of way, we could perhaps be more assured of the quality of HIE records that we had out there. And that could be for future consideration.
Yeah, I think that's something worth putting in the parking lot of items to consider as we move into the future. But thank you, Dr. Connor. And we have Pamela with a question.
I was going to ask a question about B4, so if we're not ready to move on, I can wait.
And Pamela, just hold tight. Let me see if Michelle has a question regarding the next item or would like to talk about something different.
Yes, and I'll try to be super fast. Hey, David. So just in terms of erroneous data, I think it would be important to consider the root cause of that erroneous data. Was it because of what was entered in the record for the patient that was inaccurate or needed clarification, or whether it was something in the technology, for example, in terms of incorrect patient matching or the wrong organization ID, we call them OIDs, the wrong OIDs. There are all sorts of technical things behind the scenes that can cause the wrong records to be associated to the wrong person. And that is a very different challenge compared to, say, erroneous data entry in the actual patient chart.
Yeah, good point. Thank you. And Alana's capturing that as well. So Pamela, do you want to raise your question about number 4?
Sure. I was just going to share some concerns I had with including so that it says electronic health information. So the chapter applies to electronic information residing in, obtained from, or released through, or maintained by an HIE. I have a lot of concerns with obtained from or released through, because it sounds like the regulations is now going to want to regulate the information after it's been shared through the HIE. And much like substance abuse regulations and all the things we deal with, there's really no way to track the data once it's been integrated into our own records. And so I raise concerns about kind of requiring another regulatory scheme over data that's already been shared through and now in the hands of another healthcare provider.
Yeah, good point. Let's note that. Yeah, so I think what you would say is strike the released through, I believe you're saying.
Obtained from or released through. So it's fine to regulate the data that's residing in or maintained by the HIE if that's the goal. But I think once it's been appropriately shared and it's in the hands of a recipient, it shouldn't be regulated by this regulation.
Understood. I think that makes sense. Anyone Anyone think they're, oh, well, let's see, maybe getting out in front of myself. Kim.
Yeah, and again, I think it's looking at this through a vacuum again. So my recollection in that definition was that was a definition from its infancy, right? So these regulations as a whole do deal with information that is released through HIEs. I mean, there's definitely a lot of information in these regs that address that. So it may be, again, they're not reviewing it as a whole. So you might want to like sandbox that until we've gone through them as a whole.
Fair enough. Let's make a note on 4, Alana, to revisit. And it may turn out that Pamela, your point is right on, but I think what Kim is saying is, mark it and then come back to it.
Totally fine. Get it. No problem.
Okay, let's go down a little bit to 4D. Any thoughts, reactions here? So actually, I want to scroll up just a moment, just a little bit further. It's out of. So this is getting back to the broader definition of an HIE, if you will. So we're going to come to that. So let's go on down to D and then see it, and we'll come back to anything that's definitional related. And this is this would be 2, and then we have D. The requirements in this chapter are in addition to those set forth below. And here it's just streamlining the definition. And Mike, you had a comment?
Well, the new add D, among entities under common ownership, even if the entities are under common ownership, they still may have regulatory obligations to protect that information between the different divisions of the common ownership. So I don't know that it can be, it doesn't apply, even if it's under common ownership, because there may be rules that even if it's under common ownership, the rules may apply in some cases.
And so the good point, Mike. I think what we're going to find when we get down a little further is that the definition of a health information exchange is, while it's static, it's in law today. We are looking to try to make changes to that definition. We've proposed it in the last session, and it didn't make it through. In fact, we've been asked by the committee to see if we can address some of the differences in the definition set forth that was proposed. Payers had some concerns, and we haven't yet worked that through in terms of what the definition might look like. But just note that anything related to the definition of an HIE is in statute. The regulations are just building on what's in, or paraphrasing, if you will, or actually restating what's in the statute. But Mike, that's a good point. So that may be words to the wise when we get back to the definition. Okay, let's go down to D2, Amana. Just clarifying the law here. No concerns, okay. Let's travel to page 3. And again, just clarifying the law. Anything, and we'll pause while everyone gets a chance to look at the change to 4, and then what we have in view 5. Let's do just 4 and 5 at the moment.
David, Sally, do you want to just provide some clarification for 4 as to why deleted including and going forward? I'm assuming that's to conform with updated regulations.
Well, I think the original thing would be just to streamline. If the articles referred to,
That's enough.
that was enough. Yeah.
Okay.
And Kim.
Sally Ann, it looks to me like what they struck in 4 is the new 5.
Okay. Yeah, that's what I was just reading. I just got down to it. read my mind, Kim.
Good point.
Thank you.
I missed that. Thank you.
Yeah.
In anything in the new 6 and 7?
No.
Okay, let's go on to 8.
And this is just conforming language, right, David?
Now I'm more nervous because Kim's going to correct me, but I think my serves me correct. I think that's right.
Yeah, the Cures Act.
And David, this is Michelle. I feel embarrassed for asking, but these bullets are relative to the regulations that y'all would be that HIEs would need to adhere to.
That's correct. HIE is operating in Maryland.
Yeah, these are the 26, it's actually the 2016 Cures Act, right, David? Titled the 21st Century.
Correct.
So we're just getting to the.
I want to try not to rabbit hole, but I want to just stir the pot a little bit. So in Virginia, we have been working with a client who has been who had state level sign off. They provide substance abuse behavioral health services, and they received state level sign off to participate in a national HIE network and Commonwealth. And so they determine an acceptable threshold at which they would allow that participation, knowing that if you were to be take a very conservative interpretation of 42 CFR Part 2, that they would be out of compliance with that, but they received kind of that state level approval to participate. What I'm basically trying to say is that how stringent will we know that we need to be in applying the guidelines set out in these regulations?
So I would defer. I think this is a question we would take offline and come back to, but my gut tells me when we talk to our AAGs, they're going to tell us, we follow whatever's in the law, and there isn't, particularly on Part 2, there isn't guardrails around discretion. It's pretty clear. And so I'm not sure how other states have allowed for flexibility, but my guess here is that our AGs would say, we follow the law explicitly. Now, I could be corrected at a later time, but we'll take this offline and just do a sort of a validation with it. But thank you Michelle, for that comment. Questions on 8? Okay, let's scroll down a little bit. And we're now into section 02. And Michelle, you had a comment.
Oh, sorry, Dave. I didn't want to disrupt the conversation, so I just added that relative to what we were just talking about.
Understood. Okay, so in the definition, there's some tweaks, there's some additions. This was to define what an API is, so it becomes clear later on what we're referring to. Walter, Dr. Suarez, your thoughts on the definition?
No, I think that's one thing that can happen. sufficient. Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you.
You bet. Thank you for your comment. Let's go down a little bit more, and you can see on number 3 that it's striking through the notice to one or more, which is appropriate notice means. Adrian, Ellis, your thoughts?
Sorry, David, my dog is being too loud. Yeah, I don't have any thoughts.
Okay. Thank you. Mike, your comment?
Yeah, I was just going back to the definition of API. Is that aligned with the federal application programming interface definition?
You know, I don't know. I feel like it is, but I could be mistaken, so we need to just check.
Yeah, I believe it is. Generally, I mean, it's not word by word, but it is aligned with the definition.
And wouldn't it be easier to reference the actual statute, federal statute, to say that it
Yeah.
aligns with that?
Somebody said no. Who was that? So Pamela, what do you think about Mike's comment?
I'm a big fan of cross-referencing because these definitions change frequently. I mean, look at how many times we've changed the definition of HIE just however many years we've been doing this. So to the extent we can reference other, the reason we're bringing this in is because of 21st century cures. So it would make sense that the definitions align.
So why don't we note that, Alana, just to align the definition? I think that's a good point. Sally Ann.
Oh, I was just going to say the same thing. That would be consistent with what we've done previously,
Yeah.
the streamlining we've done previously.
And thank you. Mike's actually given us he's quick on the fingers. He's actually given us the answer to the question. Thank you, Mike. Okay, let's go on down a little more. I don't think there were any questions on number 3. I was looking for Robin, anything we thought, and then we'll go to Kim, but maybe we'll come back to Robin. Kim.
Yeah, you're on 3A Romanet little I. I'm just not sure why. Again, 0.03B to B through G. I'm curious as to why not A through G.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Without trying to find it, and
No worries. We will research it. It's in the process here. That could just been an oversight. So not to worry. We'll validate it to make sure. Any other comments to the point that Kim raised, or anyone else here? Okay, we will go down a little bit further. Okay, here it's just been a strike through, I think, because it's mentioned above, and we've got a comment box on it, so we can look further down. So why don't we scroll down a little bit more on it? Right. Let's look at the number 5, where we have authorization means, and what we'll do is we'll check the cross-reference to make sure that it closely aligns. Pamela.
Sorry, I don't like the word document. I feel like you could the idea being that permission granted in compliance with the requirements of 45 CFR 164 might give us more flexibility.
Good point. So let's do a strike through on that, and that just gives us a good reminder to look at this closely to make sure that it's actually representative of what's in 45 CFR.
I agree. Think it's more user friendly and less threatening in a sense.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Connor. Okay, we're making good progress. Thank you, everyone, for looking at this, and we're almost at the halfway point. I know you guys are going, I can't believe how fast this time is going, but we appreciate your input and your involvement with this work. So let's look here at this particular section. We've struck through core elements, masturbation index, and the following items required by the HIE and needed to exchange information. And we've simply gone to, we've stripped them out. Any concerns, any reaction here?
And David, for clarification, I think we actually just moved this one further down in the list, so we should get to it. It was actually a move and not a strict strike through.
Well, thank you for the correction. Here it is, strike through for me. Okay, very good. So if we're just moving it, then I'm about to get back to it in a few moments. So let's proceed a little further, see where we get to. So under 10A, wordsmithing here, any reaction? Okay, how about under 11? Dr. Suarez, were you going to make a point?
No, I'm sorry.
No worries. Okay, let's go down to 12. And Alana, you weren't joking with us. It was just a move. Any concerns about the definition here? Craig, could I call your attention to the definition, and if you could share your thoughts about appropriateness?
Yeah, of course. No, I don't think I have any strong reactions. I am maybe thinking that we don't need to call out clinical, financial, and administrative systems. I wonder, kind of like the word document, if that's overly restrictive without purpose. But otherwise, I don't have any strong thoughts.
So, Pamela, what do you think about? I think Craig makes an interesting point. What are your thoughts there?
I mean, it's hard to envision what is not clinical, financial, or administrative, but there could be. So as long as we're just talking about, minimum elements needed to identify a particular patient across systems, I think you don't lose anything by taking out clinical, financial, or administrative.
Understood. Okay. Any other reactions to this particular aspect? So, Mohammed, please weigh in here.
Sure. I feel like this minimum elements definition is going to be interesting simply because who's defining what the minimum elements are? If I'm building an MPI and I say I use credit score, and this is completely ad hoc, right? This is not true, but I feel like there's a risk here with saying core elements of the master patient index are the minimum elements required for an HIE. I feel like we want to maybe be a little bit more descriptive in what we mean by minimum elements.
So talk a little bit more about what you're thinking.
Well, maybe aligning with USCDI's patient demographics description may be a shortcut, right? To say USCDI V1 or V2 or what have you says, this is how we identify patient demographics. And we say those are the minimum elements. It's just a suggestion. I don't know necessarily that's the way you want to go.
Thank you, Mohammed. I think that's an interesting point. Let's ask Michelle to weigh in, and then Sally Ann.
Yes, Mohammed, you just got me thinking that too. What is the acceptable confidence level for patient matching? Because if we're, for example, just going with name and date of birth, that can give us, oh yeah, that looks like the same person. But if you add a couple of extra layers, a couple of extra demographics, suddenly you realize it is a separate individual. And so, to your point, that giving that definition of what are the minimum elements may need to tie back to what is that confidence level that you have a true match.
Right. So it's a very good point you all are making. It's how do you minimum elements that lead to a positive or presumed positive match. Let's see if some others have some ideas. Sally Ann and then Luigi.
Didn't we at one time develop what the core a baseline of what the core elements were to have a match in other policy documents?
So that's a good point. Years ago, we had some of that framework, but I think the evolution of HIEs and the evolution of MPIs created a bit of a departure from that. And I think what Michelle is saying somewhat underscores the need for being careful about being prescriptive in the way that Mohammed mentioned.
Mm-hmm.
So, but yes, to your point, there was a time period when we had that.
And isn't there a set of core elements that at least the state HIE is already using that we for the MPI match, so that we have at least some frame of reference for what we're talking about?
Could be, but I guess I want to ask if there's only there could be some overlap between HIEs. There could be little to no overlap. So how would that work if we tried to use a framework of, say, what Chris is doing today? And maybe you
well, but I mean, don't we want to create some security? I mean, let's go back to the discussion with Kim, where she's getting, more complaints about records, someone else's records being, put into another patient, that sort of thing. I mean, don't we want to create have at least a baseline of what we consider to be sufficient matching? Sufficient core elements that we can have confidence that there is a match?
Yeah, I think you're making a good point, but now you're causing me to wonder, overthink what this is really telling us, and that it's just saying that in any HIE, there's a minimum number of data elements that you look at to identify a particular person as it relates to the providers that you're connected with. So what applies to as minimum to one HIE may not be the same criteria for the next HIE. And so I guess I would turn to others. And again, I'll just turn back to Pamela for a moment. Does that sound about right? Where minimum, you would view it as minimum is whatever is minimum for you as an HIE, as opposed to saying minimum means specifically A, B, and C.
But David, could I make just one more comment? Is it fair to assume that while there are other HIEs in the state other than the state designated HIE, that a lot of the information is going to go through the state designated HIE, because that's where the hospitals are feeding particularly? So that there has to be at least a bare minimum overlap.
Yes.
Or am I overthinking this?
Well,
I'll give an example of where we get our, we've had this issue with like verification of identity issues. And for example, people want to put SSNs as an identifier. But the problem is we have a lot of, well, one, it's a concerning identifier, but also we have a lot of international patients who may not have an SSN. So I think that the idea being that there should be some flexibility, presumably, based on what sources and systems an HIE is using that could give them. I don't think we want to say it has to be address, it has to be date of birth, it has to, because those things may not always be available in the systems that they're pulling from and trying to match. We may, one option would be to come up with some, and if we wanted to denote some very basic minimums, we could, but I still think we need to have some flexibility. Maybe if you want to say it has to be 4 identifiers, or I don't know what it is, but I worry about actually listing specific data elements.
I hear you. And it could be, and I think we'll hear from Michael and Luigi and Mike and a few others, that we may be overthinking it, and maybe the word minimum isn't required. But let's see what some other folks think. Michael Williams.
Yeah, hi there. Thanks. And I'm not a technologist, but I have looked at the sort of logic tree that we use internally for these master patient indexes, and we hold them pretty proprietary because there is some advantage to doing this right, where you do have these demographic information sets, but you don't have these others. What do you do? What do you look to next? And to be too prescriptive here in the reg, I think could be difficult for HIEs to implement.
So if we said, and let's turn to a couple others in a moment, but I'm wondering if we just said core elements of the master patient index are the elements required for an HIE to identify blah, blah, blah. With that, and we're just striking through it for a moment. Mike, keep me honest. Does that make sense or not?
Well, I think that makes sense. And I guess the focus should not be on the minimum elements. It should be on a high degree of confidence, that the matching is accurate and correct, especially if it's used for patient treatment.
That's a very good point. So maybe what we ought to be talking about is the confidence level as opposed to prescriptive data points. Let's see if Rob agrees. Thank you.
Yeah, I don't mean to be obtuse, but like, does this even need to be in here? Like, cause it's to me, it's just kind of assumed, like, I mean, like, and it really, to be too prescriptive here is sort of telling a software company that wants to be an HIE how they should do patient matching. I mean, some might use probabilistic, some might use deterministic, and there's so much variability in the source data that any one organization gets. It just seems like it would be impossible to even enforce and very difficult to define. So,
no, and Rob, that's a good point. I think Michelle was typing in as you were speaking that the same thought, which essentially is the notion of probabilistic or deterministic and how that might look. Let's see what a few others think here, and we can figure out what to do. Adrian, your thoughts?
David, if I remember correctly, the core elements, this definition is referenced later on when it tells the HIE what they're allowed to keep on a patient who has opted out. So if a patient opts out, they're allowed to keep certain information such as the core elements of the MPI. So it might be good to think about the context of this definition. I don't think the original intention was to get to what are those MPI elements, as well as the need for a certain level of probabilistic match. It was to let the HIE know what it can maintain, what elements it can maintain in a patient who has decided they don't want any information shared.
That's an excellent memory, Joel. Yes, that's exactly right.
Thank you, Adrian. That gives us context.
Adrian is our historian today. Thank you very much. Okay, so I think that we can hold this and to the side for the moment and see where we get to as we get further in the regs. But I think Adrian's point is a good one, because when consumers opt out of an HIE, the HIE has to have some historical way to figure out who they are. Okay, if there aren't any more comments here, we'll scroll down a little bit. And
one last thought on that, David. Even if the patient has opted out, you would still want to identify that patient at a high degree of confidence so that you make sure that they are opted out appropriately.
Yeah, let's add that, because I think that's come up a couple times, the confidence. I think Michael brought it up. I think, Mike, you brought it up as well, and a couple others. It's an interesting point that maybe that ought to be a bit more of the focus as opposed to specific data elements. But to Adrian's point, I think she's right that we have to retain some way of being able to say this is the person as we get further through this reg. Okay, very good. Great feedback, everyone. Thank you so much. Let's scroll down a little bit further. Okay, and these, for HIE education, any reactions to the strike through? And I don't remember, Alana, remind me, has this just been moved or is this an actual strike through?
This is an actual strike through.
Okay. Any concerns? Kim?
It just begs the question, why? Why delete it?
And I think we can take that away. Very, this actual moment, I don't recall. We can take that away as a homework assignment for us to come back to. And so you want to add a comment here? Very good. Is there, Kim, did you have, I think your question is a valid one, but I'd be curious to know are you sort of leaning on one side going, unless there's really a strong reason we should leave it in, or are you going, it doesn't really matter, I'm just curious?
No, I mean, I'm looking at what's been stricken, and I remember early conversations about, I mean, people need to know that these HIEs exist, and
I think it's possible that it changes over the years, that this term may not be used anywhere else in the regs at this point, so it may have just been a cleanup.
Okay, well, I think we understand what Kim is saying, and Alana, you make a good point. So we'll check it out, and we can come back to you all on that. Let's go down to 15A, and it's just word cleanup here. Okay, we will scroll down a little further, see where we get to. Again, wordsmithing, word cleanup under 17 and 18. If you can, I want to just scroll a bit further. Any concerns about 17, 18, and 18A? Mike, your thoughts, please.
Yeah, I'm back on data use again. Is there a reason that it is limited to covered entities? It looks like.
So, well, point to me where you're reading real quick.
Well, it was the data use modification. I was just reading the entire.
Scroll back up, Alana, let's see.
I didn't review these before the meeting, so basically it says, and whether or not the entity is a covered entity. It says regardless of whether or not. Okay, yeah. That makes sense.
Okay, couldn't understand where you were going, but now, okay, all right, that's good.
I just whipped by it. I missed it.
No worries. It's a lot to read, isn't it? Okay, let's go down a little further back to where we were. See if the group has any reaction. 17, 18, and 18A. Ken.
And again, I'll look at them in total, but 17 has things that say health information as opposed to in a medical record. Medical record has a defined term, is a defined term in health general, and then there's designated record set. So I'm just not sure if using health information and removing medical record and if those matter, if those changes matter from a definitional standpoint. And I don't know without looking at it globally.
Yeah, that's a good point. And then maybe maybe there needs to be further up in the definition or further down the definition, because I think when we think of health and medical, depending upon the provider type, I want to say health occupation treats the health occupation law treats it a little differently in terms of definition. I feel like, and I could be mistaken, but that's where the origins of this comes from a bit. That I feel like that's it. Whereas the health is more encompassing of the different types of providers as well, and medical is more specific. But we will check on that and create a follow-up opportunity for you here. But thank you for bringing it up. Any other? Mohammed, please go ahead.
Yeah, on 18, this idea of download, the act of the healthcare consumer in obtaining an electronic copy of the patient's information. Consumer here is the patient, or the consumer more generally the covered entity or not covered entity from earlier? I'm just a little confused on who that is.
So the consumer can be, the consumer is broad, because consumer could be the individual. And I don't know if we include the definition of caregiver. I'd have to go back and look. But the consumer could mean just that individual. Here, I think it specifically refers to just that individual. But number of hands went up quickly, Mohammed. So I think we're going to have better historians come in and weigh in. So Pamela, and then Dr. Connor.
Sorry, this is hard. I actually was going back to the comment that was made previously on the health information versus medical record. I think we just need to come up with a definition of health information then. I mean, and it can be whatever we want it to do, but I think if we're going to refer to health information, given all this discussion, let's put a definition in here and then use it consistently.
And we do away with, yeah, that's a great point. Excellent.
Can we not just adhere to how it's defined in terms of from HIPAA, so that we have some continuity in terms of referencing back HIPAA for other areas?
So Michelle, you're saying reference the definition in HIPAA.
Right.
And Mohammed's pointing out there's a definition of electronic health information in the Cures Act. So maybe we'll have to look at both. But thank you.
I think that sort of proves the point, which is the idea is I think we need to decide what the scope is and then nail it down and be consistent throughout the regs. If we want to go with EHI, which does tie back into the HIPAA definition, that might be the most inclusive. But
Yes.
then, so that might be the right one, but then just define it and use it consistently.
Excellent point. Thank you. Dr. Connor, your point.
Jumping down to 18 and 18A, we talk about download. My concern here is making sure persons have access to the ability to do the download, right? Electronic systems. And it talks about an 18A industry standards. What does that really mean? Do I need to have Adobe? Do I need to have all of that? Is that going to be easily user-friendly and easy for me to access and get? Will there be another mode or mechanism for me to get this information?
It's funny you mentioned it. I think someone on the call, we actually talked a little bit about this yesterday. So let's see what Craig's thoughts are. Craig, Dr. Connor is bringing up something actually I think you and I talked about recently.
Yeah, I think I kind of to agree with those comments. I wonder if download is just kind of too old-fashioned a term now, and if we want to instead reference, making the data available, through the means requested by the patient, whether that be a third-party application or some other method. I just don't want to be restrictive on how we're making data available, as long as it's compliant with state and federal law.
I think, to me, Craig, that would be better as opposed to talk about techie download.
Yeah, but we may need some boundaries on that, because if it's left to the consumer, the consumer, it feels like maybe that's a great approach, but maybe there still needs to be some boundaries. But let's see if Mohammed has thoughts on that.
Yeah. Hey, I just think I agree with Craig's point about the access has to be in a way that the consumer wants to receive it. But I feel like all of that conversation, I believe, is already addressed in 21st Century Cures and the info blocking provisions, that any keeper, any actor who has patient data has to make it available. So we may want to take a look at some of those provisions.
Make a uniform information.
Yeah, I think
language.
I think that's a good point. Let's make
I
a
agree with that.
check on it and see where we can align.
Yeah, I concur, David. I think there's some information, there's some language in the IFR that will also get to your point of some, potentially ways to make sure that it is technically feasible for the HIE, right? So in the request of the patient, in the content and manner that they request, but as long as that's technically feasible of the HIE. So I think it would be good if we could align them all.
Indeed, good point. Okay, very good comments. Catherine, wondering when you were going to start weighing in. You're way too quiet.
What can I say? Dusting off my memory bank. So just in the spirit of aligning, and this is 17 and 18 for consistency, I believe I saw some things up above where we had some red lines that included health data. So health data, health information probably ought to be revisited for consistency throughout as well.
Absolutely. That's a very good point. It is, a lot of this is getting into the groove, right, Catherine, where we spent many years. It's just getting back into the groove. And I appreciate your input greatly. Kim, your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, what's this is causing me to do is we define terms because we use them throughout. So I've now gone back and looked. The health information is a defined term. We're going to get to it in a little bit. Health record is a later defined term. We're going to get to it in a little bit, which alleviates some of my concerns. So I feel like, again, we're kind of, because of the order we're doing it, and not to say this isn't a fine order, but it's got the global issue. So I've also now just done a word search for download, and it's used many times in here. And it may be this definition is just fine in terms of how it's used later in the document. So I don't know. Do you again sort of highlight that and say, let's look at that in relation to how it's used throughout the rest of the document and see if it's a term everyone can be, a definition people would be comfortable with or not in relation to how it's used later in the document. Yeah.
So Alana, can you make that note in the comment box? Because it could be that, to Kim's point, it's defined this way because it's used the way it's used later on, or maybe we just need to come back and repurpose the definition that aligns it with what exists in the federal requirements. Very good points. Okay, let's scroll down a little bit further. Here it's just addition of word. Same with in Romanet 3, III, under small b and 22. Any reactions, comments here? Okay, and actually, Kim, can you look at this? And sometimes I worry that be over worrying, but that a majority and more than half, they seem one and the same. What are your thoughts on that?
That change didn't concern me.
Okay. Right, then we will travel on further. Okay, let's go to 25 and see where folks have reaction. Healthcare means. So take a look at the definition and see what your thoughts are.
David, is that straight from Health General?
I think so, but unfortunately, there's so many changes. My memory doesn't allow me to be precise, so it's better to check and confirm as opposed to guess. But thank you for bringing that up. Mike, your comments.
Well, I mean, I guess, if we think about care, treatment, or procedure, you could also include or furnishing of items if there's durable medical equipment or like involved.
Okay. Very good point. Yeah, that's a very good point. Any other reactions to what we see in 25? Dr. Suarez.
Yeah. I just pasted on the chat the definition of HIPAA, the definition of healthcare under the HIPAA regulations. I was going to make a comment. I think several people have mentioned this. I think we should cross-reference a lot of these terms. Disclose or disclosures already defined by HIPAA, access, use. I mean, the more we are consistently using the same terms in the context, of course, of health information exchanges, and that's in big way the subject matter of not just this regulation, of course, but HIPAA and others, 21st Century Cures Act, information blocking, CMS interoperability, everything else. I think that the more we retain that consistency, the better.
Yeah, Dr. Suarez, you bring to light a good point that just prompted a thought that I guess we have to go back and check with our AAG, or maybe some of you on the here now. If used in Health General, and Health General is, I'll just say for a moment, more narrow or restrictive, can we refer to what would be in HIPAA, which may be less restrictive? I feel like you have to go with what's more restrictive, but I could be wrong, and maybe that's a question we have to ask. But I guess Kim, do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, generally speaking, I try not to give a legal opinion because that would be up to your AAG and not me. So, but your instincts are right, David. I mean, if to the extent that Maryland law provides greater consumer protections, those should permeate these regulations as well. And I can't, and I'd have to look at this definition in terms of HIPAA and Maryland law to evaluate that. And I haven't had an opportunity to do that. So, but your instincts are right.
Yeah, no, thank you. And we did, and she still may be on the call. We have our one of our AAGs, but I didn't want to call her out because she may not have had a chance to really dig into this. So, but we'll take a look and see what we can find out here. Sally Ann, your thoughts?
I'm down now on 25A.
Okay.
I'm getting notes from the chat box. Recipient. Later on, we say person of interest as defined in the regulation. So is it, do we need to have that in there, or do we need to, is it just the patient? I mean, what is a recipient versus what is a patient?
It's a very good point. To diagnose, yeah, to evaluate, diagnose, and treat patients.
So David, just so you know, I think this does come from Health General, and recipient is the recipient of mental health services under Health General. So I think that must have been directly from Health General, and that I think is what is.
Okay.
So, so Pamela, would you say that we want to add a bit more language so it resembles exactly what's in Health General? Because I think you mentioned it's missing a word or two.
I don't have it memorized. I mean, I have it. It looks like it's copied, but I just was going to say, if you want it to be the same, I agree with what everyone else is saying, though. It should be consistent with some other definition, whether that's healthcare or healthcare in Maryland state law. I was just helping with the distinction between patient and recipient, because for some reason, Health General distinguishes patient and recipient of mental health services.
Perfect. We'll note that. Your memory, you guys, your memories are impeccable, I tell you. And that's great. Thank you. Anything in B, or before we travel a bit further? Okay, let's go down to 27A, like alpha. And I think Kim, you wanted to make a comment.
Yeah, it references otherwise authorized under Health Occupations Title 17, which I think is professional counselors, but it's definitely just one licensee category. So I'm not sure why it's limited to one licensee category. If I'm reading it right.
A good point. We will flag it to do a little homework. Yeah, we will. Yeah, I think you're right. We need to go back and look at that. Any other comments? I think we have a specific homework assignment on this one. Okay, moving along down to B Romanet I. And actually, I don't remember why we're calling out this specific the addition in health general, I think we're going to have to go back and take another look at that as well. Okay, let's go on a little further. And I think what we'll do, rather than try to know with certainty, because this great work that's gotten us to this point has been going on for many months actually, and I just don't remember. So we need to refresh on. Let's make a note, Alana, to refresh here on the references in health general. So that would be 4. Okay, and Michael Williams, I think you had a question, a comment.
Oh yeah, sorry, I just put it in the chat there. Wondering the extent to which these red lines might be circulated to this group. I'm not sure if you already mentioned that on the call previously.
So actually, we want you all to have everything, all 12 sections. But we thought that for the first meeting, it made sense to rekindle everyone's memory, to not just sort of dump this on you, because there wasn't going to be an easy set of instructions we could have added. What we plan to do is, as we go through sections, let's say today we finish 3 sections, we would then send it back to you all to look at our comments, to see if there's anything else that was missed or something comes to your mind, and give you all some time to go through those sections and share back with us your feedback. And what we will do is, each time we go through a section or sections, we'll send them to you with the work that happens here, so you can do the same sort of review and comment. So there are lots of bites at the apple. Please, I hope no one thinks that this is a one and done. For those who've been part of this group for a number of years, everyone can attest to the, we want to be extremely thorough, extremely cautious. We want to be, inclusive of everybody's opportunities to make changes here. It's just too important to try to push it through the pipeline. So hopefully that helps.
Yeah, I appreciate that. Thanks.
No worries. You bet. Any comment to, well, we're back to health general. So we're going to just check on that again to make sure we're correct. And I think Kim brought up health information earlier. So let's just take a look at what we have here included. I specifically want to look at the definition of a health information exchange. The way this definition reads is it's not, it works, it makes sense, people like it, but if you are a software developer and it leaves open the opportunity to say, well, if I also do a health information exchange, is it really a clear fit for me? And there are a number of software developers, the EHR vendors, that say, absolutely, it makes sense. And there are many in state government that would say, absolutely, it makes sense. So what we wanted to try to do was clear up any ambiguity that could be interpreted in the definition. And we spent, as I noted earlier, we put it was in a bill, Delegate Kelly sponsored it. And the definition we thought was okay, but as it turned out, the carriers had some questions about what was in it that would then bring them into, even though they essentially have exclusions, and the carriers were concerned that it interferes with things like care management opportunities on their part. So we agreed, everyone agreed to take this to the recess session, if you will, recess period, and look more closely at the definition. So where we are today is we still haven't been able to find a definition that works for the carriers, and we are working with a couple of them to see if we can get something that works so we can share it with the other providers. So we can share it with the Maryland Hospital Association, we can share it with you all, and everyone gets a chance to see what's been proposed. we're just not there yet, but we're hoping that the definition can be changed in this session. But it's sort of that stay tuned mode, if you will. We did actually, I think I saw a comment, we did actually pull largely the definition that was used by ONC in the regulations in what we proposed. And some people embraced it, some thought that it still made the carriers at risk. And while there's not really consensus on does it really or does it not, that's about as much as I can tell you. And hopefully we'll have something in the next month to be able to come back to you all and say, it looks like this is what seems to be a workable definition. What are your thoughts? So stay tuned, I guess, is the best way to describe it. I think Kim has a comment here. Kim, please proceed.
Kim has a question, and the question is, puts carriers at risk of what?
So the concern of the carriers is that it makes them an HIE when they feel like they're not an HIE. So, for example, if I'm a carrier that does care management and I exchange information with providers for the purposes of care management, does that mean I'm an HIE? And while some of us would say, no, of course not. If you're not, the definition isn't that narrow. The carriers would say, we hear you, but we're not convinced. We think there needs to be more language added that can make it much more clear that in certain circumstances where they're moving clinical information and not administrative transactions, they don't want to be viewed as an HIE. So that's kind of the stumbling block, just to be completely transparent. Does that help answer your question a little bit?
Yes.
Okay, good. Thank you. Dr. Suarez and then Luigi.
Yeah, my question is about whether there are other definitions that need to be modified via legislative action rather than regulatory action. So in other words, why is it that we're seeing a legislative modification of a term like health information exchange, but we're here modifying a lot of other terms?
It's a good point. So let me just sort of opine on the history, if you will. When the legislature first gave us authority back in 2000, I feel like it was 2011. They actually put in statute the definition of a health information exchange. That was changed in, I feel like it was 2016, because the definition evolved. And many back in 2011 said, don't put the definition of an HIE in statute. And the decision by the legislature was, no, we needed to include it because this was very new back then. And we've sort of outgrown it, or the industry's outgrown it. But I don't think the legislature has a lot of interest to create guardrails, definitions where they think that the regulation should be the place to do that, because it's much more nimble. If it's put in statute, the process of changing it, which you can see, is very onerous, and it can make sense, and ultimately the governor could veto it, if you will. So I think our approach has always been to try to avoid things that could be better served in regulations, putting them in statute. Particularly.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for that clarification. My suggestion is then, why don't we reference the statute when we include the definition of health information exchange in this regulation?
That's an excellent point. Maybe that's an excellent point, given the way with feedback we've received today. Let's make that something as a takeaway. That's an excellent point. I can't give you a reason why we wouldn't. I think to what Pamela and Kim and some others have said, where you can reference something, it's better to do it as opposed to include it. But so we'll take that away. Thank you, Dr. Suarez. Luigi, your comment.
Yeah, hey, David, I seem to remember that there were at least one carrier that was a registered HIE or an HIE in the state before. Are there not carriers in Maryland that are HIEs? Because I thought Care First was.
No, Care First. Wow, if there's someone from Care First on this call, duck under your desk, Luigi. Because
All right, could be wrong.
No, their carriers are not HIEs in Maryland.
Oh, okay, thank you.
You bet. But did somebody else have a comment about that? Hi. Good point, though. So let's travel down a little bit, and we see the definition of health record. I think we want to go back and look at these definitions a little bit. I think some of the feedback we've heard is that we want to either align or make sure that it works throughout, because the definitions could mean something different depending upon how they're read. Okay, let's scroll down a little bit more. And again, this is taken from HIPAA. So we're gonna note this here too, and I think we'll note high tech. So Kim, or Pamela, for a moment, I just want to ask you, based upon what I've heard you say a few minutes ago, do we need the definition? I mean, I always think we don't need the definition and then the reference. We just say high tech means, what's included under Title IV, Division B, blah, 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 as opposed to adding what it means and then referencing it. I think that's what I'm hearing from you all. Is that a fair interpretation?
Yeah, I think your definition of information blocking is what I would look for. So that way, if the definition of information blocking in 42 USC 300 JJ 52 changes, it would automatically change in the regulations. So you don't want to actually put what the current definition is. You just want to say it has the same meaning as, I mean, Kim, you may disagree, but that was what I had sort of in mind.
Yeah, I mean, if that's the decision point, right? I mean, you may be very happy with the definition right now, but it's possible the definition could change federally in a way that you wouldn't be happy, and then you're stuck with it. So the real question is, and I mean, we dealt with this when we were implementing the Affordable Care Act in Maryland. We had defined terms, and then those terms changed under a different administration, and we weren't happy with the changed terms. So having cross-reference terms at the federal, we had to go back and fix all of that. So you have to consider, is this a term as currently defined that you're happy with, knowing if it gets changed the federal level, you're stuck with that. So I mean, that's a policy decision that has pros and cons.
That's a great point. So Alana, can you highlight the 37? Because I think what we're hearing is that in some extent could be the pattern that we use on the definitions where they're included somewhere else. Thank you for that. Dr. Suarez.
Yeah, no, I just wanted to add the next one, 38, is another example. Interoperability. In this case, the definition that is provided, that text is pretty much identical to the definition of interoperability on the 21st Century Cures Act and the subsequent information blocking regulation. So that's another term that I think will be helpful, among many others that will be helpful to reference out to
specific
statute.
Yeah, if you could just, Alana, so we remember that as well for interoperability. But I think we'll go back and look at all of these. So this has been extremely useful. And we're back again to the NPI. So it just changes. There's nothing. So if it's not underscored or there's not a strike through, this is what was in the regulation has remained. I will say that there is something in the regulation that we haven't changed, that's not been changed. And you all have a question on, we'll take it away as a parking lot item, because I think our most interest now is in modernizing and aligning. If some of the information is outdated or just not relevant as we would think without some change, we'll note it and come back to it. So if there's an inclination to want to make a comment, please note that we're happy to take it, but just how we get to it is probably more downstream. Mike, your thoughts?
Well, I was going to add on to the good conversation that people were having between referencing federal citation versus state. I think that if there is a difference between federal definition and state definition, it's good to note that, because I think there is an awareness of what the federal definition is, and there might not be an awareness of what the nuance or difference is at a state level.
So would you are you saying noted as we go through it, or are you saying your thoughts?
Well, if there isn't a reference to a agreement on a policy decision around a federal citation, and there is a state citation that is different than the federal, then I would just note those differences.
Understood.
It's for awareness purposes in policy.
Understood. Okay. Other comments, Dr.
A curiosity question. Is our guidance state or federal? It's both, I'm sure. So this document should be predicated on Maryland law, Maryland guidance on the most part. Am I correct in thinking?
So you're correct in thinking, but in some instances, as we've heard from some of the attorneys on the call today, that the more restrictive requirements tend to apply. So we've either called them out by reference or we defer to them. These regulations are unique to Maryland. There aren't a lot of states that have adopted regulations on for HIEs, but there are some that are either planning or have implemented a modest amount.
So with that, having said that, and that's kind of like where I'm thinking the last comment that I heard, that we need to reference the where they're like, or where the higher law, which is the federal, in those instances where it's applicable.
Yeah, that's a good point. I think that was it's a valid ask, if you will. Okay, Dr. Suarez.
Yeah, just a quick note I just posted on the chat as well. Another important reference document is the TEFCA document that was just published less than a week ago, where there's a number of definitions used in the context of health information exchanges at the national level. And they reference also cross-reference federal source and all that, but I think it's going to be helpful to consider also aligning this definitions with the ones that are in TEFCA, because, well, the CRISP and other HIEs involved in Maryland and in any other part of the country will likely become part of the national trusted exchange framework.
Yeah, that's a great point. It's a good point. Thank you for that comment. And actually, I do recall seeing them, even though they're essentially hot off the press. But we'll go back and check them for alignment. Great. Thank you for that. Let's scroll down a little bit. Okay, so notice, I don't think there's anything here that's should be alarming, but we'll pause for a moment and let everyone take a look. And I think, though, non-HIPAA violation, yeah, we'll check that for reference to another source as well. Okay. And we're going to scroll down a little bit further. Okay. Kim, we'll pause. Go ahead, please.
On the notice,
Scroll back up.
because I was trying to read through it well.
No worries.
The idea of providing notice to a consumer via email or text message, I think, should be conditioned upon not just the patient sharing their email address, but authorizing email communication. Right? So do they want to be, have they said, I want you to communicate with me through email, through my portal, through text messaging? I mean, because if you require a phone number, that doesn't necessarily mean I want you to communicate important things through phone.
So Kim, you're thinking that the use of email, by way of example, has to be something that either the consumer firms should affirm to before, or must affirm to in order to use.
Right. I mean, I'll give you my phone number, but that doesn't necessarily mean I want you to send my records through my phone.
Right. So would that apply to, so does that make it tricky, right? Because what if the consumer says no to an email or email address, for example, and the consumer doesn't have access to a website, doesn't use the internet, not an internet user.
David,
Yes. Yeah.
that goes back to the comment I think we had early on with Craig about finding out exactly what mode of communication they want to use. Whether they have email, want to use email or whatever. I think this could be related to that conversation a little bit, because I know in most cases with my doctors or providers, they do ask permission to use my email. It's not a natural thing to do that.
Yeah, that's a good point. And I think can you the issue of notice in general? I feel like we let's just make a note to look at notices in general, because I feel like we probably want to take a closer look at that, because we want to find a method that works for consumers. Yeah, so I think we want to look at that. Sally.
David, I think that if I recall correctly, for like the Medicaid MCOs, and we have to get permission. We collect that information, but when we contact them, we have to get permission. Now, I know we get around it with MDH's permission with some kind of implied permission, but we do have to get permission before we can start calling or texting people for a whole host of reasons. Protecting the individual, depending on what we're calling them about. There's all kinds of rules about when we call patients, what we can say. So I think we need to research this one a little bit more.
Yeah, because permissions in many scenarios.
But I mean, there's already some guidance. I know at the state and the federal level.
Right. So I think it's permission. So permissions would be the first step for notices, as well as other areas of the regulation. So I think we'll have to come back and look at what permission means. Then I think the feedback we've received on notice makes good sense.
Mm-hmm.
Pamela, were you?
Although I don't want to get stuck in a catch-22 where it's like, how do we reach out to the consumer to get their permission to reach out to them in a certain way? Like, we have to have a default that, like, whether that's mail or what it is. I mean, I hear what everybody's saying and I agree with them. It's just dealing with this on the provider level. It's really hard to get preferences from every single consumer as to how they want to be communicated with, and having that tracked. And so I just want to make sure that we're being realistic here, and maybe having a default method that's sort of always allowed might be beneficial.
Excellent.
Now, I mean, I think I can tell you that for the Maryland Department of Health Medicaid, mail is the default right now. But then also what we send in the mail has to be vetted by the state as well. But I mean, we're talking about protecting individuals in the case of mental health issues, substance use issues, domestic violence issues, things like that. So I'm just very concerned that we make sure that we have clear definition about what we're talking about, defining our terms, and then what consent is, or what permission is.
Understood. Thank you. That's an excellent point. So let me just take a pause for a moment. We like to keep us on target for time, even though there's a natural tendency to want to run over. We have about 3 minutes left. So allow us to just sort of recap and talk about next steps in the next few minutes, as opposed to continuing onward. If that's okay with everyone, that's what I would propose to do. Hearing or seeing no objections, let me just say again, thank you all for taking part of this group. The state, we value your feedback. We have a great deal of respect for the folks that participate in this group. We think it's through you we get to as close as we can to perfection on the privacy and security regulations that impact HIEs in Maryland. So we're deeply indebted on many levels, and it's great to see everyone again. What we will do is we'll take the sections of the regulations that we've covered today. We have some specific homework to do, and we will do that. But at the same time, we're going to send it to you all to see if there's anything you think we've missed, any comments you want to share with us. And we'll take them into consideration at the same time. And then I believe, Alana, correct me if I'm wrong, we're scheduled to reconvene virtually on October 28th at 2:30. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Has the invite gone out for the 28th, or is that something you would send?
That's pending.
Okay, so, and I want to give thanks to the organization representative. I see Steve Fox, the attorney representing Post and Shell on the call, and Cindy Haynes is his colleague. They are really the brains behind the great work that we're presenting to you all today. We have taken the approach that CMMI takes. If you've ever worked with CMMI, where representatives from CMMI will join a meeting, but they will not answer questions. They will not step in any way. They're more to monitor and listen. This has been very helpful, and I'm sure we've given them some food for thought, which the staff here will have some deeper discussions with them offline. But I do want to give them a round of applause for the great work that they've done and thank them for joining in today. Alana, have I missed any operational statements, operational points that we need to make?
No, David, I think that's all. We'll, I believe, make the recording available, and we'll send out more information regarding the next meeting.
Okay. With that, everyone, again, thank you so much. Have a great rest of the week, and we'll look forward to talking to you as we continue down the pathway of modernizing these regulations. Have a great day, everyone.
Thanks, folks.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everybody.
David.